The wooden cabin stood solitary in the depths of the forest, a silent sentinel against the howling winter winds. Outside, snow piled in drifts against the walls, while inside, a single lamp cast yellow light across sparse furnishings. January 2025 had brought one of the harshest winters in memory, but Jason Miller preferred it this way: isolated, quiet, far from civilization. At 32, the former mercenary had chosen this exile, this deliberate separation from a world that had demanded too much blood from his hands. Tonight, like every night, he slept nude on his bed, blankets askew. It was a small rebellion, perhaps, but one he insisted upon: the freedom of his body from constraint, the last vestige of control he allowed himself. The cabin creaked with cold. Jason slept deeply, his muscled chest rising and falling in the dim lamplight, his body generating heat that vanished into the frigid air. His dreams were mercifully empty tonight, free from the faces that often haunted him. Something changed. Weight pressed against his chest, sudden and foreign. Jason's eyes snapped open, years of combat training instantly erasing any trace of sleep. A figure loomed above him, female, her face mere inches from his, her body pressed intimately against his nakedness. He reacted without thinking. One powerful arm shot out, grabbing her throat while his other hand reached beneath his pillow for the knife he kept there. In seconds, he had reversed their positions, pinning the intruder beneath him, blade at her throat. "Don't move," he growled, fully awake now. "Who are you? How did you get in?" The woman beneath him didn't struggle. In the faint light, he could see her face clearly now, eerily beautiful, with skin so pale it seemed almost luminescent. Her eyes locked with his, an unnatural blue-white that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Don't," she whispered, her voice carrying a strange accent he couldn't place. "They'll kill me if they hear." Jason increased pressure on the knife. Who's after you?" "Please," she whispered, her breath forming visible vapor between them. "Your heat. I need your warmth or I'll die." He narrowed his eyes, acutely aware of his nudity and her peculiar coldness. Her skin beneath his hand felt like ice, dangerously cold. Despite the intimate contact with his bare body, she wasn't warming. "You have 5 seconds to explain," Jason said, relaxing his grip slightly, but keeping the knife steady. "I'm being hunted," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm from the glacier-born royal lineage. They arranged my marriage against my will. I escaped, but on this planet, I'll freeze without human warmth." Jason's mind raced. Nothing about this made sense. Royal lineage? This planet? Was she delusional? Dangerous? Or something else entirely? "This is some kind of trick," he said flatly, though something about her desperation seemed genuine. "You broke into my house." "I followed heat signatures," she replied, her body beginning to tremble beneath his. "Your cabin was isolated. I didn't know. You would be unclothed." Despite himself, Jason felt a flush rise to his face. He became painfully aware of their position, his naked body pressed against her clothed one. He shifted slightly. "I'm dying," she whispered, and for the first time, fear cracked through her composed exterior. "I cannot maintain body temperature without proximity to heat. If you force me away, I'll freeze within hours." Jason studied her face, looking for deception. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and the trembling was getting worse. Whatever was happening, she appeared to be in genuine distress. "Fine," he said finally, removing the knife from her throat but not putting it away. "But if this is a trap, I'll kill you before your friends can reach us." He rolled to the side, pulling the blanket over both of them. The woman immediately pressed against him, her frigid skin shocking against his warmth. "Do you have a name?" he asked gruffly, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in this bizarre situation. "Aurelia," she replied, pressing her face against his chest. "My name is Aurelia." The night passed in strange, tense silence. Jason didn't sleep, keeping vigilant watch, knife still in hand. Aurelia remained pressed against him, her breathing slowly stabilizing as she absorbed his body heat. By morning, her trembling had stopped, though her skin remained unnaturally cool. When dawn's pale light filtered through the cabin windows, Jason finally disentangled himself. He pulled on pants quickly, still keeping the knife within reach. "You have some real explaining to do," he said, watching as Aurelia sat up in his bed. In daylight, she looked even stranger. Her skin had a faint bluish undertone, and her eyes definitely contained an unnatural glow. "I'll tell you everything," she said, wrapping his blanket around herself. "But first, may I?" She gestured toward the fireplace. Jason nodded curtly, lighting a fire while keeping her in his peripheral vision. Once flames were crackling, she moved toward them, still wrapped in his blanket, but maintained a careful distance. "Too much heat will kill me as quickly as too little," she explained, noticing his questioning look. "I require balance." "Start talking," Jason said, folding his arms across his bare chest. "No more cryptic statements." Aurelia inhaled deeply, her strange eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "I am from a star system you would call Proxima Centauri. My people, the Glacier-born, evolved on an ice planet with precise temperature requirements. Our bodies cannot generate sufficient heat, nor can we tolerate excessive warmth." Jason's expression remained skeptical, but he didn't interrupt. Was heir to the ruling house. Our politics revolve around arranged marriages, genetic alliances to strengthen bloodlines. I was betrothed to Prince Theon Harkon, a cruel man who viewed me only as a weapon to be wielded. "A weapon?" Jason couldn't help asking. Aurelia's gaze shifted to him. "My people possess certain abilities when properly motivated. Theon wanted to use me in his military campaigns." She paused, shuddering slightly. "I refused and fled in a small vessel. It crashed in these mountains 3 days ago. I destroyed most of it to hide evidence, but they're searching for me." These Glacier-born people? Theon's hunters. They've placed thermal tracking devices throughout the area. They detect unusual heat signatures, like yours, living alone in this cold. Jason ran a hand through his short hair, trying to process this information. It sounded insane, yet her physical differences were undeniable. "If I move more than a few meters from a heat source like you, I'll begin to freeze," she continued. "My physiology cannot adapt to Earth temperatures." "So what? You expect to just sleep with me indefinitely?" Jason asked bluntly. A faint blush colored her pale cheeks. "I need your proximity to survive while I find a way to disable their tracking systems. Once that's accomplished, I can construct a thermal regulator from salvaged components." Jason paced the small cabin, weighing options. He could force her to leave. But if her story was true, that would mean her death. Despite years as a mercenary, he wasn't in the habit of leaving defenseless people to die. But helping her could bring unknown danger to his doorstep, the very thing he'd retreated to these woods to avoid. "I don't have much choice, do I?" he finally said. "But listen carefully. Any sign that you're lying, any hint that you've brought your problems directly to me, and our arrangement ends. Understood?" Aurelia nodded solemnly. "I understand. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jason muttered, turning to pull a shirt from a drawer. "I'll need to hunt today. We'll need more food if there are 2 of us." "I can help," she offered, rising from the bed. The blanket shifted, revealing a form-fitting suit of unfamiliar material beneath. "I'm not helpless." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Stay by the fire. I'll be quick." "I cannot stay away from you that long," she insisted. "The fire provides ambient heat. but not enough to sustain me. I need direct contact. Jason closed his eyes briefly, already regretting his decision. Fine, you can come, but stay close and do exactly as I say. He dressed quickly, donning thermal gear for the hunt. From a trunk beneath his bed, he retrieved a hunting rifle and ammunition. When he turned back, Aurelia had draped herself in one of his shirts, comically large on her slender frame. "This holds your residual body heat," she explained. "It helps." Jason nodded, not trusting himself to respond to the sight of her in his clothing. "Let's go." The forest stretched white and silent around them as they ventured out. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Jason had given her his spare pair, stuffed with rags to fit her smaller feet. Aurelia stayed within arm's reach, occasionally brushing against him when her steps faltered. "There," Jason whispered, pointing to tracks in the snow. "Deer passed through recently." Aurelia studied the impressions, then suddenly stiffened. "Wait," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "Look there." Jason followed her gaze to a nearby tree. At first, he saw nothing unusual, but then caught a glint of metal, something small and disc-shaped, embedded in the bark. "Thermal tracker," Aurelia whispered. "They're already here." Jason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. How many would they deploy? Dozens, perhaps hundreds. They form a network, triangulating unusual heat signatures. Jason weighed their options quickly. "We need to find your crashed ship. If there's anything salvageable, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with." Aurelia nodded. "It's about 4 kilometers east, but we'll have to avoid the trackers." "Can they detect us now?" "Not immediately. They're short range, designed to build a comprehensive map over time. But if we trigger too many in sequence, then we move carefully." Jason adjusted his course, leading them deeper into the forest. "Stay in my footprints. Minimize your heat signature." They traveled slowly, Aurelia pointing out 3 more trackers they managed to circumvent. Twice. They waded through icy streams to break their trail, the frigid water seeming not to bother Aurelia at all, while Jason fought to keep his teeth from chattering. By midday, they reached a scorched clearing. Blackened earth and melted snow formed a perfect circle amid the trees, centered around a pile of twisted, half-buried metal. "You weren't kidding about destroying it," Jason remarked, surveying the wreckage. "I couldn't risk them finding it intact." Aurelia knelt beside the debris, her hands searching through ash and melted components. "I'm looking for a crystal node, about this big." She held her thumb and forefinger about an inch apart. "It contains biological monitoring data." Jason kept watch while she searched, eyes scanning the tree line for movement. Something about this situation felt increasingly dangerous. Not just the aliens hunting Aurelia, but the woman herself. She moved with precise, practiced motions that spoke of training beyond what she'd admitted to. "Found it," she eventually announced, holding up a small, translucent crystal that pulsed with inner light. "This will help us track their communications." "How exactly?" Jason began, but froze at a sound in the distance. Faint but unmistakable, the mechanical whir of an aerial vehicle. "Scout ship," Aurelia whispered, her face paling further. "We need to move, now!" They ran, no longer concerned with leaving tracks. Jason led them toward a narrow ravine he knew offered some cover, Aurelia keeping pace despite her supposedly fragile condition. The whirring grew louder behind them. "Down!" Jason hissed, pulling Aurelia into a snowdrift as a sleek, metallic craft glided over the treetops. It was unlike any aircraft he'd seen, silent except for that distinctive whir, with no visible propulsion system. As they lay pressed together in the snow, Aurelia trembling slightly against him, Jason felt the weight of his decision growing heavier. This was real. She was real. And now he was involved in something far beyond his understanding. The ship passed overhead, continuing toward the crash site. Jason waited until it was out of sight before speaking. "We need a better plan than just running and hiding," he said quietly. "Tell me everything you know about these hunters." Aurelia's breath came in visible puffs as she explained. "They're mercenaries, hired by Theon's family. Some are from my world. Others are species adapted to various environments. They use technology to track and capture. They want me alive. And if they find me with you?" Her eyes met his, the strange glow dimming slightly. "They'll kill you without hesitation. I'm sorry I've brought this to you." Jason nodded grimly. "Let's get back to the cabin. We need supplies if we're going to survive this." They traveled in tense silence, taking a circuitous route to avoid potential trackers. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk was falling, and both were exhausted. Jason immediately set about reinforcing the windows and doors, while Aurelia examined the crystal node more carefully. "This contains biological data," she explained as she worked. "It was monitoring my life signs during the journey. If I can recalibrate it, we might be able to detect their communication frequencies." Jason paused in his work. "You seem to know a lot about technology for a royal heir." A small smile, the first he'd seen, touched her lips. "Did I say I was merely an heir? On my world, the ruling class must master multiple disciplines. I specialized in biological systems and combat." "Combat?" Jason raised an eyebrow. In answer, Aurelia moved suddenly, faster than should have been possible. Before Jason could react, she had closed the distance between them, her hand stopping a hair's breadth from his throat. "Had I wished to harm you last night," she said softly, "you would not have awakened." Jason felt a newfound respect mingled with wariness. "Good to know," he said evenly. "Now, if you're done making your point, we need to establish watches for the night." As darkness fell completely, they shared a simple meal of canned stew Jason had stored. Aurelia ate little, explaining that her metabolism worked differently, requiring less frequent nourishment but more constant heat. "About that," Jason said awkwardly as they finished eating. "The sleeping arrangement?" "I understand your discomfort," Aurelia said, "but my need for your body heat remains. Without it—" "I know. You'll freeze," Jason finished. "It's fine. Just give me some warning next time before you climb on top of me." The faintest hint of color touched her pale cheeks. "I apologize for my abrupt arrival. I was desperate." As they prepared for sleep, Jason laid out clear instructions. "I'll take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours for my shift. And Aurelia—" He fixed her with a serious look. "No more surprises." She nodded solemnly, wrapping herself in blankets near the fire. Jason positioned himself by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the moonlit forest beyond. His thoughts churned with questions and contingencies. He'd left behind a life of conflict, only to have it literally climb into bed with him. Several hours passed in silence. Jason was beginning to think Aurelia had fallen asleep when she spoke. "Why do you live alone, Jason Miller?" He glanced over, finding her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I prefer it." "No one prefers true isolation," she countered softly. "They merely fear connection more than loneliness." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "You don't know me. I know you sleep with a knife under your pillow. I know your reflexes are those of a trained fighter. I know you chose a defensible position with clear sightlines for your home." She paused. "These are not the habits of a simple woodsman." Jason remained silent for a long moment. "I was a mercenary," he finally admitted. "Private military contractor. If you want the fancy term. Did things I'm not proud of. Decided I'd done enough damage in the world." "So you exile yourself as punishment?" "As penance," he corrected. "Or maybe just to stop adding to the problem." Aurelia considered this. "On my world, when someone seeks atonement, they don't withdraw. They serve. They find ways to create balance for the harm they've caused." No offense, but your world is currently trying to force you into a marriage you don't want. Not sure I need moral guidance from that system. She smiled again, a sad expression. Fair assessment. Silence fell between them again, more comfortable than before. Eventually, Aurelia rose, moving closer to where he sat. Your watch is nearly over, she said. You should rest. Jason nodded, suddenly aware of his fatigue. Wake me if anything changes. He moved to the bed, maintaining his routine of sleeping unclothed, despite the unusual circumstances. As he settled beneath the blankets, he felt the mattress dip as Aurelia joined him, maintaining a respectful distance while still close enough to share warmth. Thank you, she whispered in the darkness, for believing me, for helping. Jason didn't respond, but in the silence that followed, he felt something shift between them, a tentative trust forming in the most unlikely of circumstances. Morning arrived with crystalline brightness, sunlight reflecting off snow, creating a dazzling glare through the cabin windows. Jason woke to find Aurelia already up, studying the crystal node with intense concentration. I've located their base, she announced without preamble. The hunters have established an outpost approximately 20 kilometers north, in a glacial ravine. They're using it as a command center for the tracking operation. Jason sat up, immediately alert. How do you know this? She held up the crystal. It's receiving their communications. They don't realize one of their monitoring devices is active. And what does that mean for us? Aurelia's strange eyes met his. It means we have an opportunity. If we can disable their central thermal transmitter, they won't be able to coordinate the tracking network. They'll be blind. Jason ran a hand over his face, considering. That's a big if. We'd need to infiltrate their base, locate this transmitter, and disable it without being detected. Yes. And I suppose you have a plan for accomplishing this impossible task? Aurelia's expression remained serious. Actually, I do. But it will require your help, and your trust. Jason studied her for a long moment. Tell me. Over breakfast, Aurelia outlined her strategy. The hunter's base utilized a thermal regulatory system, similar to what her people used on their homeworld. Such systems had specific vulnerabilities, particularly to rapid temperature fluctuations. If we can create a controlled overload, she explained, the entire system will shut down to prevent catastrophic failure. That would disable their tracking capabilities long enough for me to construct a personal thermal regulator. And how exactly do we cause this overload? Aurelia hesitated, then reached into her form-fitting suit, extracting a small metallic device. This is a pressure bomb, non-lethal, but powerful enough to disrupt their systems. Jason stared at the device, then at her. You've been carrying an explosive this entire time? A tool, she corrected. One I hope not to need. Trust, already fragile between them, wavered. What else haven't you told me? Aurelia met his gaze steadily. Many things, Jason Miller. As I'm sure there are many things you haven't told me, but nothing that changes our current situation or endangers you unnecessarily. He wanted to press further, but she was right. They both had their secrets. And right now, survival took precedence over complete disclosure. Fine, he said eventually. We'll try it your way, but we'll need to prepare carefully. The next 2 days were spent in meticulous planning. Jason drew detailed maps of the surrounding area based on his knowledge of the terrain, while Aurelia provided information about the hunters' likely security measures. They gathered supplies, fashioned makeshift weapons, and established emergency protocols. Throughout their preparations, a strange intimacy developed. Each night, they shared the bed out of necessity, Aurelia requiring Jason's body heat to survive. Initially awkward, the arrangement gradually became routine, a silent acknowledgement of their mutual dependence. During daylight hours, she stayed within arm's reach, occasionally touching his arm or shoulder when her temperature dropped too low. On the eve of their planned infiltration, they sat before the fire, the cabin quiet save for the crackling flames. Outside, snow fell gently, adding to the already significant accumulation. "If this goes wrong," Jason said quietly, "you should know there's a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Emergency supplies, another weapon, enough to keep you going for a while." Aurelia looked at him with surprise. "You're planning for your death?" "I'm planning for contingencies," he corrected. "Something you should appreciate." She nodded slowly. "On my world, we have a saying, prepare for frost, hope for thaw." "We have something similar," Jason replied with a small smile. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst." "Your species and mine may not be so different after all," Aurelia observed. Jason studied her face in the firelight. The strange, ethereal beauty that had initially seemed alien, now becoming familiar. Maybe not in the ways that matter. A moment of silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Then Aurelia broke it, her voice softer than usual. "Why do you sleep without clothing, even in this cold?" The personal question caught Jason off guard. He considered deflecting, but found himself answering honestly. After years of uniforms, gear, always being confined, it's freedom, a small one, but mine. Understanding crossed her features. "Freedom, yes, that I understand." Their eyes held for a long moment before Jason looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." They retired to the bed, positioned as they had been for several nights now, close enough for Aurelia to absorb his warmth, but with a carefully maintained space between them. Tonight, however, as darkness filled the cabin, Jason felt her shift closer. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a whisper so faint he barely caught it. "Not of dying, but of failing, of remaining a pawn in games I never chose to play." Without thinking, Jason reached across the divide, his hand finding hers beneath the blankets. Her skin was cool against his palm, but not the dangerous cold of their first night. "We won't fail," he said with more confidence than he felt. "And when this is over, you'll make your own choices." Her fingers tightened around his. "As will you, Jason Miller." In that moment, something fundamental changed between them. A connection forged not merely from necessity, but from recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to fight for autonomy, to resist being weaponized by those with power. Dawn arrived with steel-gray light and biting cold. They dressed in silence, preparing for the journey and what lay beyond. Jason donned his old tactical gear, equipment he'd hoped never to use again. Aurelia watched him transform from reclusive woodsman to soldier, her expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked as he shouldered his pack. She nodded, tucking the pressure bomb securely into her suit. "Ready?" They left the cabin behind, setting out through deep snow toward the northern mountains. The journey was arduous, the terrain becoming increasingly treacherous as they ascended. Aurelia maintained better footing than Jason expected, her body seemingly adapted to icy conditions despite her need for external heat. By midday, they had reached a ridge overlooking a narrow ravine. Below, nestled among sheer ice walls, sat a structure unlike anything Jason had seen before, a sleek, metallic compound that seemed to emerge organically from the surrounding ice, with no visible seams or joints. "The Hunter Base," Aurelia confirmed, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "The main thermal transmitter will be in the central chamber." Jason surveyed the approach through binoculars. "I count at least 4 sentries, plus automated systems. Getting in won't be easy." "We don't need to enter through conventional means," Aurelia replied, pointing to a narrow fissure in the ice wall behind the compound. "That leads to the cooling vents. The engineers would have installed access points for maintenance." And you know this because standard glacier-borne design principles, she answered. Some things remain consistent, even across star systems. They waited until dusk, when lengthening shadows provided additional cover. As they prepared to descend into the ravine, Aurelia suddenly placed a hand on Jason's arm. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "know that I'm grateful for your help, your heat, your humanity." The words sounded strange coming from her lips, a recognition of difference and similarity all at once. Jason nodded, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't sound hollow or overly sentimental. "Let's move," he said instead, leading the way down the treacherous slope. They reached the ice fissure without incident, squeezing through the narrow opening into a dim, winding tunnel. The temperature dropped further inside, frost forming on Jason's beard and eyebrows. Aurelia, however, seemed to grow more animated, her movements becoming more fluid as if the extreme cold energized her. "This way," she whispered, navigating the labyrinthine passages with surprising confidence. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger space, a maintenance chamber filled with humming machinery. Pipes and conduits ran along the walls, carrying what Jason assumed was coolant, or some equivalent. "The central chamber is one level up," Aurelia murmured, examining the ceiling. "There should be an access point." A sudden alarm blared through the facility, its high-pitched wail echoing painfully off the ice walls. Aurelia's eyes widened. "They've detected us," she hissed. "The thermal sensors. They must have registered your heat signature." Before Jason could respond, a section of wall slid open, revealing two figures in sleek armor. Their helmets concealed their features, but the weapons they carried were unmistakably lethal, some kind of energy rifles that hummed with contained power. Jason reacted instinctively, drawing his own weapon and firing in one fluid motion. The bullet ricocheted off the first figure's armor with a metallic ping. The hunters raised their weapons. "Down!" Aurelia shouted, shoving Jason aside as twin beams of energy scorched the air where he had stood. What happened next occurred so quickly that Jason barely processed the sequence. Aurelia's hands moved to her sides, extracting what looked like metallic handles. With a flick of her wrists, blades of pale blue energy extended from each, plasma swords that cast an eerie glow throughout the chamber. She moved with inhuman speed, crossing the distance to the hunters before they could fire again. Her blades sliced through the air, connecting with the first hunter's weapon and cleaving it in two. The second managed to discharge another blast, but Aurelia twisted impossibly, the energy passing harmlessly beside her as she drove one plasma blade through the hunter's armored chest. Both opponents fell in seconds, leaving Jason staring in shock. Aurelia turned back to him, the blue light of her weapons reflecting in her strange eyes. "We need to hurry," she said, voice steady despite what she'd just done. "More will come." Jason nodded, struggling to reconcile this lethal efficiency with the vulnerable woman who had needed his body heat to survive. "Lead the way." They ascended through the facility, encountering two more hunters whom Aurelia dispatched with the same ruthless precision. Jason provided covering fire when needed, but largely found himself following her lead, a reversal of their dynamic that wasn't lost on him. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The space was dominated by a large, pulsing machine, the thermal transmitter, its core glowing with intense energy. Around it, control panels displayed incomprehensible symbols and readouts. "This is it," Aurelia confirmed, moving quickly to one of the panels. "I need to disable the safety protocols before we place the pressure bomb." Jason took up position by the entrance, weapon ready. "Make it fast. We've made too much noise to go unnoticed." Aurelia worked with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Almost there." A new alarm sounded, deeper and more urgent than the first. The chamber's main door began to close, a security lockdown. "Now or never," Jason called, backing away from the descending door. Aurelia finished her sabotage, then reached for the pressure bomb. With precise movements, she attached it to the transmitter's main housing, activating its countdown sequence. 10 minutes, she announced. We need to be well clear by then. They barely slipped beneath the closing door, emerging into a corridor now bathed in pulsing red emergency lights. Aurelia led them toward an exit route, but as they turned a corner, they encountered what they'd both been dreading. A figure stood blocking their path, taller than the hunters, clad in ornate armor that gleamed with embedded technology. Unlike the faceless sentries, this one's helmet retracted, revealing a male face with the same pale skin and glowing eyes as Aurelia, though his held a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. Aurelia, he said, his voice carrying that same strange accent. How disappointing to find you in such primitive company. Theon, she replied, her plasma blades still active at her sides. I should have known you'd come personally. Jason raised his weapon, but Aurelia's hand on his arm stopped him. This is my fight, she said quietly. Prince Theon's lips curved in a cruel smile. Come now, cousin. This rebellion has gone far enough. Return to your rightful place, at my side, under my control. I am not your weapon, Aurelia replied, her voice vibrating with suppressed rage. I am not your property. You are nothing else, Theon sneered. A tool of our dynasty, as you were bred to be. Without warning, he drew his own weapon, a plasma blade larger than Aurelia's, crackling with energy. If I must damage you to reclaim you, so be it. The genetic material remains valuable, even if the vessel is compromised. They clashed in a blur of blue light, plasma blades connecting with explosive force. Jason backed away, searching for an opening to help, but their combat moved with such speed and precision that any intervention risked hitting Aurelia instead. The facility trembled around them, the pressure bomb's effects beginning to manifest in the systems. Ice cracked along walls, and emergency lights flickered ominously. Aurelia fought with focused intensity, her smaller dual blades allowing quicker strikes against Theon's more powerful single weapon. She scored a hit against his armor, slicing through an external plate to reveal vulnerable circuitry beneath. Theon roared in anger, retaliating with a sweeping blow that Aurelia barely avoided. 5 minutes until detonation, Jason called out, checking his watch. We need to move. Aurelia nodded almost imperceptibly, never taking her eyes off her opponent. She feinted left, then struck with both blades simultaneously, creating an opening in Theon's defense. With a precise thrust, she drove one plasma blade into his shoulder joint, disabling his weapon arm. Theon fell to one knee, his plasma blade deactivating as it clattered to the floor. He looked up at Aurelia, hatred and disbelief mingling on his face. Finish it, he growled. Prove you're worthy of your bloodline. Aurelia stood over him, plasma blades humming with deadly potential. For a moment, Jason thought she would strike the killing blow, could see the temptation in her tense posture. Then, deliberately, she deactivated her weapons. I am worthy of more than our bloodline, she said quietly. That's what you never understood. The facility shuddered more violently, pieces of ceiling beginning to fall around them. Theon laughed bitterly. You think this ends here? The dynasty will never stop hunting you. Perhaps, Aurelia acknowledged. But they'll be doing it without you leading them. She turned away, joining Jason as they ran toward the exit. Behind them, Theon shouted incoherent threats that were swallowed by the sounds of the disintegrating base. They burst out into the open air just as the pressure bomb reached detonation. The explosion wasn't conventional. Instead, a massive thermal fluctuation rippled outward, causing the ice structure to fracture and collapse in on itself. The hunter's base imploded with a tremendous groan, sinking into the ravine as ice shifted and reformed around it. Jason and Aurelia didn't stop running until they reached the ridge from which they'd initially surveyed the facility. Looking back, They saw only a disturbed area of ice and snow. No evidence that the base had ever existed. "Will he survive?" Jason asked, breathing heavily from their escape. "Likely," Aurelia replied. "Theon is resourceful, but without the tracking network, without his hunter force, he's temporarily neutralized." As they began the long journey back to the cabin, a new storm moved in, snow falling in thick curtains around them. The added cover was welcome, hiding their tracks from any potential pursuers, but it also made travel more dangerous. By nightfall, they were forced to make camp in a small cave, the blizzard having rendered further progress impossible. Jason built a small fire, while Aurelia examined the data crystal, which she'd used to download information during their infiltration. "Did you get what you needed?" he asked, settling beside her near the flames. She nodded. "Evidence of the dynasty's crimes, not just against me, but against dozens of worlds. Genetic experimentation, forced breeding programs, planetary exploitation." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Enough to destabilize the ruling council when distributed through the proper channels." So this was never just about escaping a marriage. The marriage was merely a symptom of a larger disease. Aurelia confirmed. "My people were once explorers, seekers of knowledge. The dynasty perverted that purpose, turning us into conquerors." Jason studied her face in the firelight. "And what will you do now? Return to change things?" "Not yet. First, I must ensure the evidence reaches those who can use it effectively." She hesitated. "And I must construct a thermal regulator if I'm to survive independently on this planet." The unspoken question hung between them. What would happen once she no longer needed his body heat to survive? Would she leave? Continue her mission alone? The thought troubled Jason more than he cared to admit. They ate a sparse meal of emergency rations, then prepared to rest. The cave offered little comfort, but the fire provided necessary warmth. As they had for several nights now, they positioned themselves close together, sharing body heat for Aurelia's survival. "You could have killed him," Jason said after a long silence. "Theon, you had the opportunity." Aurelia was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She turned to face him, her strange eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "Because I'm trying to end a cycle, not perpetuate it. Killing him would have satisfied a personal vendetta, but done nothing to address the systematic problems." Jason nodded slowly. "That's wiser than most humans would be in your position." "Don't mistake restraint for forgiveness," she replied. "I haven't forgiven what was done to me, what is still being done to others like me. But change requires more than vengeance." Her words resonated uncomfortably with Jason's own past, his retreat from violence that had ultimately been an evasion rather than a resolution. Perhaps there was a middle path between fighting and fleeing. The storm continued through the night and into the following day, forcing them to remain in the cave longer than planned. They passed the time talking, Aurelia describing her homeworld and its complex politics. Jason sharing carefully edited stories from his mercenary days. The shared danger had created an intimacy between them that transcended their physical proximity. By the time they finally resumed their journey toward the cabin, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. What had begun as reluctant cooperation had evolved into genuine alliance, perhaps even friendship, though neither used that word. They reached the cabin as dusk was falling, both exhausted from the difficult trek. Inside, everything remained as they had left it, a small miracle given the circumstances. Jason immediately set about rebuilding the fire, while Aurelia examined the data crystal more thoroughly. "The thermal network is definitely offline," she confirmed, studying the readouts. "And I've uploaded the evidence to a secure transmission channel. It will reach sympathetic members of the council within days." "And Theon?" "Stranded, at least temporarily. Without the base's communication array, he can't contact reinforcements." She looked up, meeting Jason's eyes. "We've bought time, nothing more." Jason nodded, understanding the implications. "So what's next?" Aurelia set the crystal aside. "I need components to build a thermal regulator. Some I can salvage from my ship's wreckage. Others, I'll need to acquire from your world's technology." "That could be challenging without attracting attention," Jason noted, "but not impossible." The conversation paused as they attended to immediate needs: food, water, rest. The simple domesticity of these tasks felt surreal after the violence they'd experienced hours earlier. As night deepened around the cabin, they found themselves once again preparing to share the bed, a routine that had become comfortingly familiar. This time, however, as they settled beneath the blankets, Aurelia moved closer than usual, her body aligning against Jason's with deliberate intent. He froze, uncertain. "Aurelia." "I know," she whispered. "This began as necessity, but I think we both recognize it has become something more." Jason couldn't deny the truth of her words. The connection between them had evolved beyond pragmatic alliance, beyond even friendship. In the strangest of circumstances, they had found recognition in each other, kindred spirits despite their different origins. "If you build this regulator," he said carefully, "you won't need my heat anymore." "No," she agreed. "But perhaps I might want it nonetheless." The distinction between need and want, between survival and choice, hung in the air between them. Jason had spent years avoiding entanglements, commitments, connections of any kind. Yet here, in his self-imposed exile, he'd found someone who understood his need for freedom while offering a different kind of bond. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her, his hand cupping her face. Her skin was cool beneath his palm, but not dangerously so. Her body had been adapting, finding equilibrium. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "Connections, relationships. I left that life behind for reasons." Aurelia's strange, glowing eyes held his. "As did I. Yet here we are." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, a natural progression of everything that had transpired between them. Her lips were cool against his, but warming quickly. The exchange of heat now a choice, rather than a necessity. What followed was exploration, of differences and similarities, of boundaries crossed by mutual consent, rather than desperate survival. Her body, so alien in some ways, responded to his touch with unmistakable humanity. Where they had shared proximity before, they now shared intimacy, the distinction profound and transformative. Afterward, lying together in the darkness, Jason found himself contemplating a future he hadn't allowed himself to envision before. Not a return to his old life, but not continued isolation either. Something new, undefined but full of possibility. "What happens when this is over?" he asked quietly. "When you've built your regulator, when the evidence reaches your council." Aurelia was silent for a long moment, her head resting on his chest. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I've spent so long fighting against a predetermined path that I haven't fully considered what freedom might actually look like." "We have time to figure it out," Jason said, surprising himself with the implication of continuity, of partnership. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "Yes," she agreed. "We do." The following weeks unfolded with a strange rhythm, periods of intense activity interspersed with moments of domestic tranquility. Jason ventured into nearby towns to acquire components Aurelia needed, using cash and keeping a low profile. Together, they salvaged usable technology from her crashed ship, working methodically to construct the thermal regulator she required for independence. During this time, they remained vigilant, aware that Theon and his forces, though disabled, were not defeated. Aurelia monitored the data crystal regularly, tracking communications and watching for signs of renewed pursuit. The evidence she had stolen made its way through channels to her homeworld, creating the political disruption she had hoped for. Reports of unrest among the ruling council, challenges to the dynasty's authority, calls for reform. As winter began to loosen its grip on the forest, the first signs of spring emerging in patches of exposed ground and longer days. Aurelia completed her regulator, a sleek device that attached to her suit, providing the precise temperature control her physiology required. "It works," she announced after the first full day of testing, her face alight with triumph. "Complete mobility, independent temperature regulation. I'm free." The word carried weight beyond its immediate meaning. Free from the need for Jason's body heat. Yes, but also free from the constraints that had defined her existence. The arranged marriage, the dynasty's control, the limitation of her own biology. That night, for the first time since her arrival, they had a choice about their sleeping arrangements. The necessity that had brought them together was gone, replaced by voluntary connection. When Aurelia joined Jason in bed, it was with deliberate intent rather than desperate need. "Different," she murmured as she settled against him. Choosing warmth rather than requiring it. Jason understood. Choice made all the difference, transformed obligation into desire, necessity into preference. It was what they had both sought in their separate ways, the freedom to determine their own paths. The message came 3 days later, transmitted through the data crystal. The ruling council had been dissolved, the evidence of corruption and abuse too overwhelming to ignore. Theon and his supporters had been removed from power, their assets seized, their authority stripped away. A provisional government had been established, led by reformists who sought to restore the Glacier-born's original purpose as explorers and scholars rather than conquerors. "They're asking me to return," Aurelia said quietly, reading the transmission. "To help rebuild, to establish new principles of governance." Jason felt a cold that had nothing to do with the lingering winter. He had known this moment might come, had prepared for it intellectually, if not emotionally. Her mission had always been larger than their connection, her purpose extending beyond the forest and the cabin and him. "Will you go?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. Aurelia looked up from the crystal, her strange eyes meeting his. "I don't know," she admitted. "My people need guidance, direction. This opportunity for change may not come again." He nodded, understanding. "You should go," he said, the words difficult but necessary. "This is what you fought for." "Yes," she agreed, "but not all that I've found." They didn't discuss it further that night, both needing time to consider implications, possibilities, choices. The freedom they had both sought now presented its own challenges. The weight of decisions made without coercion, paths chosen rather than imposed. Morning arrived with pale sunshine and the first birdsong of spring. Jason woke to find Aurelia standing by the window, her slender form silhouetted against the light. She had wrapped herself in one of his shirts, no longer for warmth, but from choice, from connection. "I've decided," she said without turning. "I will return, but not alone. Not permanently." Jason sat up, fully alert now. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her expression resolute. "My people need guidance, yes, but they also need new perspectives, new understandings. The isolation that allowed the dynasty to corrupt our purpose must end. And I find myself unwilling to leave behind what I've discovered here." Her eyes held his. "Not just Earth, not just freedom. You, Jason Miller." The directness of her statement left no room for misinterpretation. Jason found himself momentarily speechless, caught between ingrained caution and newfound desire. "I can't ask you to leave your world," he finally said. "You're not asking. I'm offering a different possibility. Travel between worlds, missions of diplomacy, and exploration rather than conquest. A new beginning for my people. And for us. The proposal hung in the air between them, radical and exhilarating. Jason had retreated to this forest seeking solitude, seeking penance. What Aurelia offered instead was purpose, connection, the chance to create, rather than merely avoid causing harm. "I'm not a diplomat," he said, a weak objection that they both recognized as such. Aurelia smiled, the expression transforming her otherworldly features into something deeply, recognizably human. "Neither am I, but we both know something about fighting for freedom, about choosing our own paths. Perhaps that's exactly what's needed now." Jason rose from the bed, crossing to where she stood by the window. Outside, snow was melting, revealing the forest floor beneath, dormant now, but with the potential for new growth. "When would we leave?" he asked, the question itself an acceptance. "Not immediately," she replied. "There are preparations to make, both here and on my world, and I find myself reluctant to leave this place too quickly." She gestured to the cabin around them, the simple space that had witnessed their extraordinary journey from desperate strangers to chosen companions. Jason understood. This place had become significant to them both, a sanctuary and a beginning. "Then we stay," he said, taking her hand. Her skin was cool against his palm, but by choice now, not necessity. "For as long as we need." Aurelia smiled again, leaning into him as they watched spring begin to reclaim the forest. They stood together at the threshold of multiple new beginnings, the thawing of winter into spring, the evolution of necessity into choice, the transformation of isolation into connection. Outside, the last snow continued to melt, revealing the dormant earth beneath, ready for new growth. Inside, two people from different worlds contemplated a shared future, one they would build together, freely chosen, without constraint. Jason's arm tightened around Aurelia's shoulders, a gesture of protection that had evolved into one of partnership. She had first appeared above him as he slept unclothed, a desperate stranger, seeking warmth. Now she remained by choice, offering not just companionship but purpose, direction, renewal. As morning light strengthened around them, they began planning their future, not one predetermined by royal councils or military contracts, but one they would forge themselves, across stars and worlds, together.